we're starting. And hello, everybody. Welcome to Coffee, Kegs, in Kriegsspiel. Today I am here with Jan Heinemann, and we are going to be talking about his scenario, Bohemian Incursion. I had the pleasure of helping him to umpire this scenario yesterday. It was run as our usual Saturday battle. It was a pretty cool scenario. It's actually based on history. It's a relatively historic scenario. After the battle was over, I went and I read the history of the battle online and found that it played out somewhat historically, although we had some twists. And Jan is going to talk to us about the battle, what inspired him, how he set it up, how it ran, and what he felt the outcome of it was, and what he and probably a lot of us learned from it. I know I learned a few things from it, such as don't roll the orange dice so much. So, Jan, I'm going to turn off my camera so you have a little bit more of the screen. There you go, and go ahead, share with us the story.
All right, thank you very much, Marshall. So the historical background of this scenario is an actual border raid, so to say, by the Prussian army, in this case led by the Prince of Prussia, Henry himself. They split up into two main columns, and one entered Bohemia at Peterswalde, which is here on the top right corner of our map. And the second one entered further west, about 60 kilometers further west. And their main objective was to destroy Austrian, or let's say Habsburg, depots in the area and along the Elbe River, which we can see a tiny bit on this map in the bottom right corner there, right where Orsig is. That's the Elbe, and it continues further south, and there are many depots, and the Prussians actually managed to destroy quite a few of them, and even a transport fleet on the Elbe of about 200 or more ships. So the Austrians then came up, or the Reichsarmee, so to say, the imperial army of the Roman Empire came up to face them, and the Prussians, having reached their objective, retreated back into Saxony, where they came from. And this whole operation happened in 1759, in April, mid-April, and took about 1 to 2 weeks. So, historically, though, the Habsburg troops were very light garrison troops. They had basically no chance to withstand the Prussian invasion. The only historical relevant battle in this sector, at least, happened here around Kolm, which also proved in our game to be a very defensible, advantageous strongpoint. And the Prussians managed to dislodge this position by moving a strong cavalry wing around, which forced then the Habsburg troops to fall back to secure their lines of communication. So that was the idea behind the scenario. Then I thought about how to set it up. I did a small-scale test run last Sunday with a 2 Prussian versus 3 Austrian players on this eastern half of the map, basically, which played out really well. And then I thought, okay, let's try this at a grander scale with 6 versus 6 or even 7 versus 7. Turned out we played 5v5, but that was totally fine. So the Austrians are in a tough position here, in a tough starting position. They only have 3 players out of their 5 total players on the board at game start. Those are like garrison commanders at Töplitz in the west, at Karwitz in the center, and Aussig in the east. And they have only a few troops with them at the start of the game, and then they have scattered around on garrison towns in quarters, some light troops, mainly a little bit of artillery, Grenzer and hussars mainly. And they don't really know what's going on. The briefing just says, you're the garrison commander here of this sector. You have these troops in the area, and your objective is to protect the depots, which you can see in the blue circles. And Aussig should be one as well, but anyway. And to like organize the troops in the area, because there is a huge Habsburg army coming, marching up to prepare for the summer offensive into Silesia or Saxony, which was by that point controlled by the Prussians. So they have a yeah, they are really in a tough spot, because first they need to reconnoiter what is going on. We placed the Prussians, which were coming from the north, obviously, and coming through the mountain passes at various points. We placed them at the beginning of the game, turn one, directly in contact with the forward garrison troops. We had some hussars and some Grenzer here in good spots. And those units decided either to stay if they had good ground and try to delay the Prussians, or they ran away immediately. And of course, send word to their commanders that, hey, there are some Prussians coming down the mountains. What shall we do? And so the Austrians had to coordinate a plan. And the idea was, at least the idea I had, that they would concentrate somewhere. Turned out more by accident than planned that Caen was this position where two players met and destroyed effectively a Prussian cavalry wing coming through the mountains here.
Mm.
And then on turn 3, I rolled for the Austrian reinforcements to arrive via 3 roads. They could choose that at the beginning of the game where they wanted to come in on the southern map edge, and unfortunately they then only came on to the map on turn 4 and had to start gathering intel about the situation. The battle had at that point basically developed into 2 engagements, one over in the west, where one garrison commander fought a small infantry wing and a cavalry wing, and then this engagement over there in the east, one cavalry wing against 2 garrison commanders. And then that was, I found rather interesting, in the center here, where the main Prussian infantry wing and another cavalry wing came in. They were pretty much slowed down by the Grenzer troops in the area, and then eventually started to sort of siege or try to break into Zwochtleben, which has a depot there. But at that point, the Austrians came from the south and deployed their main reserves here along this line from Zensel to Kawitz. And we then decided to call the game in favor of the Habsburg troops, because the Prussians were nowhere near to even touch one of the depots. They didn't know about all of them, only the main depots at Töplitz, Kawitz, Tirmitz, and Aussig. And there were 3 more which they could have destroyed if only they had found out about them and managed to break into the towns, which didn't happen.
Right here, I think, is where the decisive engagement happened from my perspective. I can't comment on what was happening on the other 2 wings, but right here, the Prussians had a very strong column and had some initial success. And then, for like 2 turns in a row, the Austrians just clobbered them. And then they finally fell back, as I recall. So the Prussians failed to make the progress that I think they needed to make. They were delayed up here because they didn't have artillery at the head of their column, so they had no way to drive off these troops other than to send cavalry on disadvantageous ground against these troops. And as I recall, this unit here fell back to what seems to be a church right here, and actually held out for a couple more turns. And then even after it was captured, after it surrendered, they then had to mop up, reorganize, and come south, which meant that this Prussian force down here only had about half of their column engaged until towards the end of the battle when the other half came up. So I think that's one of the things where if you lose your timing early on, it's really hard to recover. It's kind of like getting off on the wrong foot. It's very hard to correct that and recover. Um, and I don't know that they ever actually did, at least not in the center. I don't think they did poorly. I think they just made a poor starting decision, and that poor starting decision just cost them so much, there was nothing they could do. That was my
Hmm.
take on it.
Yeah, they should have at least put their grenadiers in front. I mean, if
Hmm.
you're coming down such a bottleneck like a mountain pass, with buildings even in it and all that, and the trees and steep slopes around, you don't want to have heavy cavalry in the front. They can do nothing about it.
Hmm. Right, right, absolutely. And I was impressed though with the flow of the battle in that for a while it looked as though the Prussians were going to win. I think at one point we even talked about calling it in favor of the Prussians.
Yes.
The Austrians looked beat, but what a difference a turn makes. I don't know what happened, especially up here. Something happened up here where the Prussians went from winning to. I went back on the next turn and looked at it, and they looked like they were getting surrounded. What happened there, Jan?
So basically, first Mackay was bringing reinforcements to this position to calm to his artillery, basically, which made this position untakeable for the Prussians. And then at the same point, he sent his hussars around
Hmm.
to threaten their flank. And by that point in time, Peter came up. And also, Peter was scared that some troops, as you can see here, if we would have had another player, there would have been in the north a Prussian cavalry column. And Peter was scared that this actually existed and sent his garrison troops all around here to scout. And they came all together to this location at the right point in time and almost surrounded the Prussian cavalry wing there.
So it was more luck than anything then for the
Yeah,
Austrians.
yeah. I mean, this position at Calm, as I said, is a very strong position anyway. But especially Peter coming up then from the southeast was decisive.
Well, there you go. And then over here, the Prussians were moving. They actually had a column that was on its way to the depot, as I
Yeah.
recall.
Hmm.
But what did the Austrians had reinforcements coming in, or I can't remember exactly what happened. I know they
I
had a
think
small force here.
yes, indeed. They were so the garrison player here. He went on a travel around the landscape and to meet all his garrison troops, and he came up at Zigmantel when he realized that a Prussian column was coming down here, and then eventually the cavalry wing was coming up here. That allowed him to directly organize his troops here in defensive positions in these woods, light infantry, in this town, light infantry. Then he fell back to this line. Eventually, the cavalry pressed him and then forced him to fall back. So his troops are mainly shattered right now, but they are on a good way to get back into the town. And then at some point, he still had this garrison at Ullersdorf, where there is a
A
depot the
depot.
Prussians didn't know about. And at the right point in time, he ordered them, or a few turns in advance, he ordered them to come back to Tüplitz and deploy along this steep river here. And once they spotted this cavalry movement down here, these units decided to turn and face them.
Hmm.
So would have been hard for the cavalry to get into town that way.
Wow. Yeah, I was worried about the Austrians not being able, well, actually, either team not really being able to form a coherent strategy. And I don't know if they did. I think everybody just kind of operated independently. I know that my commander in the center, the commander in chief, who was a new player as I recall, I know he was sending messages out and trying to urge people forward, but I don't know that a coherent strategy ever really developed other than be aggressive and attack.
Hmm.
And I don't know what the because I didn't have an opportunity to read the Austrian dispatches, so I don't know what the Austrian dispatches said. So,
Yeah, that's I find to be a very interesting aspect of this scenario and how it is set up. So basically, the Austrian intel flow was: we have contact here, we have contact there. I'm moving here, I'm moving there. So no big plan making.
mhm.
Um,
Did the Austrians have a commander in chief who was able to make such a decision, though?
yeah, that was one of the reinforcement players, the infantry wing, which
Mm,
deployed here in the center of the map. But of course, he came in late and he had to get intel and information on what was going on in all these areas. So there was much of a delay for him to come up with a plan. The Prussians, on the other hand, they were allowed to have a planning session before the game started. They could decide which passes they wanted to take through the mountains, how they wanted to set up their columns and all that. But once they were in the mountain passes and engaged with the enemy, of course, what became tough for them to coordinate throughout along the front line. I think they managed to do that eventually once they crossed or pushed down the passes into the open. Then there were ways, of course, to deliver or back this way behind the mountains. But yeah, so there's this sort of balance in this intel limitation, communication limitation.
yeah, I remember the one of the subordinates here coming through the mountains was sending contact reports to his commander in chief over here, and it took an hour
Mm-hmm.
for the report to catch up. So, do you think that giving the commander in chief troops to command impairs their ability to coordinate the battle? I know that typically we do give commander in chief at least a reserve or something to command so they have
Mm-hmm.
something to do, and we don't want them to latch on to one player and micromanage one player. We want each
Yeah.
person to kind of run their own thing, but at the same time, it seems to me like we need to have a commander in chief whose hands are free so he can ride from position to position and determine kind of what's going on and then coordinate action. What's your thought
Mm-hmm.
on that?
Uh, I'm not decided on that. So my idea of giving the commanders in chief of each team here a rather big force, actually, is to sort of simulate the static and slow moving and very complicated maneuvering of 7 Years' War armies, especially concerning the infantry, and splitting to simulate that, splitting cavalry from infantry as well. So maybe we could have removed the westernmost Prussian small infantry wing and just take that player and put him in command of the central infantry under direct command of the commander in chief. That would be possible, but I think if the commander in chief doesn't have actual troops that are needed to fight in the first line, um, they will probably, and we have seen that in previous games, they will run around the battlefield and coordinate and gather intel themselves by moving their avatar across the map or along the map. And that is really not what a pre-Napoleonic 7 Years' War, Great Northern War, whatever you want to
Mm,
play command structure would work like. Um, Even that we allow all these dispatches to go around, I feel is already too generous compared to the historical situation.
mm,
For Napoleonic, certainly not. There's proof of a high increase of message flow during, especially then under Napoleon. which funnily enough led at some point at the extreme to slow things down. So they had to reduce that. They had to reduce the number of aids and all that stuff. But at this point in time, like there is one order of the day, and that's probably all you get. And if you're lucky, then you get one report from a neighboring wing telling you that the enemy is in
Hmm.
front or something, and that's all you'll have to deal with.
Wow, that's very different from what we're used to. One
Yeah.
of our YouTube viewers, Potbellied Slim, asks, "Was the landslide up north historical or an umpire action?" And I think he's talking about what happened up here. Did
I think he is talking about the which pass he was allowed to take. I
ah
think he wanted to go down this one to
okay.
Straden. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And by scenario design, I only allowed this one, this one, this one, and this one.
oh, and you said this was closed because of a landslide.
Yep.
And was that was an umpire decision, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right, that makes a lot of sense. I was like, what does he mean by a landslide? But okay.
Hmm.
HAJ Brad wants to speak. I'm not sure how to. I've invited him to speak. Do I have to drag him up or does he have to click onto
I
the
think
stage?
he needs to click there on becoming speaker or something.
Okay. Well, he's been invited, so we'll see if he makes it up onto the stage. And if he does, I'd love to hear what he has to say. And yeah, I can't manage that myself. But yeah, this was a really interesting battle. It had so much going on, so many moving parts. Um, I didn't have any idea. I was very skeptical that the players would kind of sort themselves out, and I don't
Hmm.
think they did. I am surprised that the Austrians won, given
Yeah.
how spread out they were.
Hmm.
Um, it was a very interesting battle, and I liked how the units did not stay engaged for an extended period. Like they would come together, they would exchange fire, there'd be a result, and then they'd pull apart, which I
Hmm.
think is very historic. That's the aim of a system that I've worked up, and it seems like this system. Who's the author of the system? What system did we use here?
So basically, we used the brigade system dice and the slightly modified variant John did with the ammo result, out of ammo result.
Hmm.
And then like the that we assumed all units to be of regular quality and then roll different die levels based on their conditions and situations they found themselves in. That was a modification I made.
Okay, and I'm pulling up the dice here, and you can see that some of the dice have let's see here, they have ammo markers. Let me see if I can pull one up. Maybe it's here like on a 10 or a 9. There we go. There's the out of ammo marker. So the unit that rolls this die is out of ammo. Here's out of ammo on an advantage hit. I think it worked pretty well. There were only two levels of disruption, I think. There was uh, the standard white disruption, and then
Mm-hmm.
I think we had breaking and surrendered were the only
Yeah.
other two that I saw. Breaking,
Well,
and
yeah.
there was the one unit that surrendered, which was actually those Grinzers in that church that we talked about earlier. Otherwise, we put what, two hits on a unit, and then the unit was eliminated.
Two for cavalry and three for infantry.
And I don't think any units were eliminated, but
No, no.
there was the one unit that was captured.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I don't think Brad figured out how to get in onto the stage. I don't know. Maybe there's a setting we have to tweak, but I apologize for that. I want people to be able to come in and speak. There might be a skill we have to learn, a trick to it. But I think the players had a good time, and you've even got a couple of after action reports. Is that the case?
Yeah, McKay did write one. He was the commander of the artillery moving up to Colm.
Yeah, one of the
Mhm.
interesting things is there was a lack of infantry for the most part. This was largely a cavalry action, it seems.
Yes, that is due to two things. Firstly, the Habsburg troops were especially keen on light troops, light infantry, the Grenzers, which are recruited from the border regions of the Austrian Empire, and hussars especially. So the main part of their cavalry is hussars, whereas the Prussians, on the other hand, have lots of heavy cavalry, cuirassiers and dragoons, and not so many hussars. And if you go back and look at actual historical order of battles from the time period, you'll find that the cavalry makes about two-thirds or a half at least of an army composition.
Wow.
And that is also due to the fact, as I said, it's so hard to maneuver infantry and get them into position and then close in on the enemy, deliver a volley, try to rally the men, stop firing, then advance again, fire again, and then eventually one side will run away. But on the flanks, because the infantry is, I mean, we know that infantry in the 7 Years' War was able, in some cases, to form square. It was not unseen, but more uncommon than common.
Hmm.
And they were deployed in these long, fragile lines. So that meant if one side would win a cavalry engagement on one of the wings, the enemy army was in despair. I mean, the cavalry would then simply swing around and roll up the whole line.
Hmm.
So that's because or why both armies had so much cavalry on their flanks to protect them.
Hmm. Wow. I did not know that. I did not know that at all. Being an American, we don't know a lot about the 7 Years' War. We study what we call the French and Indian War here,
Yeah.
which is sort of here in the United States. It's sort of like a hero story of people like George Washington fighting, in the British Army and defeating the French and the indigenous allies of the French and stuff like that. And we actually don't even talk about it very much because for most people, war is a subject that they have a hard time understanding.
Mhm.
They think that the people who fought in the war were kind of dumb for standing out in lines and shooting at each other. And
Mhm.
there's so many misconceptions and myths, and people don't understand that these decisions, such as, you know, how do you compose a line of infantry? Where do you put the cavalry? And these decisions and these tactics not only had results on the battlefield, but the battlefield and the way the battle went has a result on the rest of human history subsequent to that. So, these very little things that people have no interest in are the reason why nations were built or destroyed. And I think it's important to learn about this. And this is where Kriegsspiel comes in. Kriegsspiel allows us to kind of study these decisions and these tactics and why things work the way they do. And not only is it a lot of fun, but it's very insightful and it helps you to understand. And you also appreciate the value of luck. As I like to say, it's better to be lucky than good. But I think luck is a major factor in warfare, and we certainly see it here when we play Kriegsspiel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you only read like the operational reports or battle overview reports, you won't see that aspect so much. But if you go down to reports of single soldiers, there are so many instances where I don't know. On paper, you would say this unit must win this engagement, and then some bushes move on the flank and they run away.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's something, especially then when it comes to war games like board games and such, that this contingency aspect is not well represented.
Hmm.
And in Kriegspiel, we can do that.
Yeah, which I love. This is amazing. It's a proper sandbox, and it's the most fun sandbox to play in, and it's a heck of a lot better than Hex Encounter. I'll tell you that. So no, I love it. This is the only way to war game. We have a few comments before we wrap up. We've got a couple minutes left here. Peter says he's expecting high praise for his part in the Austrian victory. Like Peter was there, wasn't he? He made it on the field, didn't he?
Yeah, Peter was commanding the easternmost Habsburg forces here,
Yeah, he he
and
he he saw the battle from a distance, didn't he? I'm messing with you, Peter. I'm giving you a hard time, Peter. I wasn't even there. I was in the middle. Oh dear. But yeah, we actually talked about Peter, your involvement, how you came up, and how the garrison troops that went on that wide flank march kind of impacted the enemy all at the same time, basically crushing the Prussian attack. And that was partially decisive. So that was a big deal. Partially decisive. How do you like that term? Henry says he wanted to say that the command situation for the Austrian commander in chief, to my mind, was historically accurate. Very good. He says that he found that he did not have enough time to order troops, read dispatches, write dispatches, and the administrative overload was high. So I take it Henry then was the Austrian commander in chief. Is that the case?
yeah, yep,
And
absolutely.
and is that the situation we wanted to put Henry in? Or do you think maybe we should have given him a lieutenant to command the troops while he handled the dispatches? But you've also mentioned that historically they didn't get to send too many communications.
hmm Yeah, maybe the commander of the Austrian reinforcement troops is a special case because of how the scenario is designed. Where I would say, yeah, okay, maybe you get someone to command the infantry so that you have a bit more time to deal with the mess. But
Hmm.
generally, I wouldn't do that. I think the overload is appropriate. Yeah.
Wow, appropriate. Well, there you go. And Peter's happy for his compliment. Partially decisive or whatever. Well, there you go. Okay, well, everybody, I want to thank you all for tuning in to Coffee Kegs and Kriegsspiel. You can again join the International Kriegsspiel Society. It's at kriegspiel.org. Click on the Discord link, hop in, and participate with us. We also have a Patreon, which I didn't even post today. Big deal. But if you want to support us in the IKS, you can do so on Patreon. It's patreon.com/Kriegspiel. And I just want to thank you all for being here and for tuning into the show. And we have good stuff to come as early as next Saturday. In fact, there'll probably be some games in the middle of the week. Heck, there might even be a game today. I don't know. But hop into that Discord and get involved. Thank you, Jan.